This week on Information Technology Leaders, Chris Corrado, Chief Information Officer at AT&T Wireless. Now here's your host, Laura Schildkraut.
Today's guest is an Executive Vice President and the Chief Information Officer for AT&T Wireless Services. He started his career with IBM before moving into financial services, where he spent the next 17 years of his career. During that time, he became a computer geek who not only understood the business, but also thoroughly believed that the business was more important than the technology. After working in New York, Japan, and London, he accepted an opportunity to move to the West Coast to re-engineer AT&T Wireless's IT organization. He strives to make everything he touches not just the best it can be, but the absolute best. He lives both work and life on the edge. He seems to attract risks, yet always laces those pursuits with responsibility. Finally, he considers sleep a necessary evil. Please welcome Chris Corrado. So Chris, where were you born?
I was born in Brooklyn and lived there for about 8 years. And then we moved to Westchester County, and I finished my high school at Westchester County.
What did your parents do for a living?
My dad was a clinical psychologist. He was a little bit different. My mom was a teacher. And in my dad's house, you had a couple of rules: respect your parents, don't get arrested, and do really well in school.
So those were the rules, okay. Your dad also had a rule, an interesting philosophy about what you were able to do during the summer.
Yeah, in my house, you basically, if you lived in the house, you had to work in a camp, and it was a camps for children, disadvantaged kids. And you had to work with them for as long as you were in the house. So from age 12 to about age 18, every single summer, I was a volunteer working with disadvantaged kids.
What did you do?
I did arts and crafts, sports, anything to keep them occupied, kind of help their lives a little bit, make them feel a little bit better about what they could do.
And through all of this, when did you first know you were smart?
Not that smart. Perceptive, I guess, is probably a better way to put it. Perceptive about people, and you learn that at an early age. You just build on it over time.
How did you select the college that you first attended?
I came from a hometown that was pretty small, called Pleasantville, New York, of all names. And it was really kind of a quaint town, quiet, not a lot of people. I wanted to go to a bigger city, larger place, be exposed to a lot of different people, but I couldn't afford to really go outside the state. So I had to stay in the state university system, and decided to go to Buffalo because it was the furthest point away from New York.
And the coldest.
And freezing.
And how did you find your attitude towards academics at that point?
You know, I wasn't that serious about it. My dad was not too happy about it because he was an educator and really fantastic in it. And I thought, well, it's time to give it a whirl, see what I could do. And when I went to school, he was a little bit nervous, I was a little bit nervous. And then I found it actually pretty easy. And he was shocked that I actually did as well as I did.
Did you end up graduating from SUNY Buffalo?
Not at Buffalo. I left, actually had a little bit too much fun, so I was a little bit nervous. So I thought I wasn't challenged as much as I should be, so I went to Albany and finished up at Albany.
Why Albany?
Albany had a really good reputation, really solid business school. I thought that would be a good foundation. Some other programs that I thought would be useful as well. Not too far from kind of my culture, if you will, of New York, but an interesting place to be.
Yeah, it was an interesting place. But I went to SUNY Albany also. We found out that we graduated a year apart. And it always surprised me that Albany is the state capital of New York, because it's sort of a backwards little place.
A very exciting place to be.
Kind of quirky, yeah. Did you continue to volunteer during your summers?
I did, actually. I worked with equal opportunity students. I volunteered, I taught economics, and I taught math. And also a little bit of computer science on the side.
What was your general take on Albany, kind of in retrospect?
Excellent value for the money. Very competitive, almost too competitive at times. The reputation was good, but probably should have been better, given the quality of the students that were there and the rigor that they have to go through.
You left college with a number of different job offers. How did you manage your first sort of career finding experience?
Well, I went to IBM because I thought IBM was the best managed company in the world, and I thought no matter what I did, there would be a pretty good career. And initially it was learning as much as you possibly can, although when I started working, I didn't really have much to do, except I walked into an office that was full of manuals, and since I didn't have anything to do, I immediately just started reading the manuals. And I thought the more you learned, the more you would expose yourself to, the more you could actually do ultimately when they finally asked you to do something. In my case, I got into trouble playing around with security on the system, so they then decided it was time to send me to a real school and educate me rather than have me break into their systems over and over again. and that's when things really started to take off.
This at IBM?
That was at IBM.
All within
that's
IBM.
Right. Yeah.
So what surprised you about this first sort of full-time experience?
You know, part was the company and part was the job itself. They were very patient about your ability to be productive. I was really taken aback by that. And I couldn't figure out, quite frankly, how the company was making as much money as it was making. Because I wasn't very, very busy. I had to make myself busy. So I got kind of nervous in the beginning. Why am I not able to do as much as I think I can do? And so I just started learning by reading and talking to other people and really exposing myself to what they did, because the job itself actually was fairly easy in the beginning.
Were you really concerned that the company would go out of business?
I was.
Why were you concerned that the company would go out of business?
Well, we were wasting, I felt, was a lot of money at the time. And I came from a very modest environment. My dad ran a nonprofit company. You pinched pennies all along, and that wasn't happening. And people weren't as productive as I thought they could be, not nearly as productive. And I thought if they were in a very competitive industry, they were going to be in trouble at some point.
Mm-hmm. What else began to frustrate you about the IBM culture?
Merit. The focus wasn't on merit. It was really, at the time, how long you worked for the company. So you were promoted primarily based upon how long you were in a job versus your impact to the business. With the exception of the sales force, which was impressive. They were very, very solid. And I thought that might be an opportunity at some point in the future where they would really recognize merit.
Mm-hmm. And was that just frustrating to you?
Very frustrating.
Yeah.
You know. You wanted to be the best, but if you weren't going to be recognized and separated, why bother?
Mm. Then after about 4 years, Morgan Stanley recruited you. Were you ready?
Well, I thought I was ready, and I hoped I was ready. I really wanted to be pushed to the maximum of my ability. I didn't really know what I could do, and I thought if I could succeed at a place like that with their reputation, I could pretty much succeed anywhere, but I might not. It just might get the best of me, and I might not be able to compete. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't really sure.
Did you really have a strong interest in working in financial services and on Wall Street? Was that a big draw for you?
Not really. I didn't know anything. I didn't know what a stock or a bond was. I just was totally impressed by the people I interviewed with. They were extremely smart. Their work ethic was fantastic. And it was almost like a bit of a startup company. It was a partnership at the time. And people were very focused on a common set of objectives and a common mission.
And then how did the company go about preparing you to be able to work there?
Not very well. They just sort of dropped you right into the thick of things and watched how you performed, challenged you every step of the way. Not in a bad way, in a very productive way. Everybody was really smart, worked really hard, and you fed off each other. If the person next to you was the best, the person next to the other side of you was even better than that person. So you felt, at best, average walking into the place. And if you thought you were the best, and all of a sudden the next day you're feeling average, it's not a very good feeling. So you immediately start thinking, what do I have to do to be better than I am?
Does the statement, be careful what you wish for, start to ring true at all?
Definitely.
And did they have any kind of a training program that you went through?
Well, Morgan Stanley had a fantastic training program initially, but I wasn't part of that training program initially. This was when you came right out of school and you went through what was really a boot camp, in essence. And they ran all the basic systems at that point. For me, I didn't know anything about financial services, so they decided to offer a program for some of us, which in effect was to cram an MBA down your throat, if you will, in a very, very short period of time at night, after work. But work never really ended there. So you were just carving out a part of the day between, those 24 precious hours.
Well, you were hired in as a programmer. How important is it to understand the business?
Critical. You can't survive in that business. The impact that technology can have on that business is significant in terms of managing the risk of the environment as well as just making money.
So what were some of the projects you were working on?
Oh, there were several. One of them was to build a real-time ticker plant system that was trade stocks over in Asia as well as in the US and Europe. Other projects were a back office system that Morgan Stanley was building, which was to replace a system that they had been in effect renting prior to that. And it was going to be the first of its kind. And this is where it set them apart. The mission was to build a multi-product, multi-currency global system to trade all of the products they traded around the world. No company had ever taken that on before.
And were you on that project?
I was on basically supporting the underlying systems that supported those applications. So the operating system environment, the hardware environment was my responsibility. And then the application programmers were building the software on top of that.
How would you describe the cultural differences between Morgan Stanley and IBM?
Very different. Work as hard as you can, as fast as you can, with the smartest people you possibly can. That was their mantra. At IBM, it was, spend your budget, because that's what you were given. If you didn't spend your budget, the following year it would be taken away. And Morgan Stanley, it was the opposite. How much value can you deliver as quickly as you can?
So you were more comfortable, certainly, in that environment.
That's right, that's right.
Yeah. And your boss had an interesting approach to dealing with people who complained or criticized. What was his approach?
If you complained about it, it immediately became your responsibility, and that was it. And then if you couldn't fix it, somehow you just were ostracized out of the environment. So it was definitely survival of the fittest.
Sounds very gentle.
Yes,
Yeah,
very.
yeah. So what were some of the things that you complained about so that you could get on those projects?
Well, yeah, immediately I was in an environment, I was trying to develop software and a time-sharing system that we in effect licensed. So we ran it internally, and it was just unreliable, and I used to complain about the reliability, and they would just immediately turn to you and say, well, then fix it. If you're so smart, go fix it yourself. So it was taking an underlying operating environment and making it more reliable so that the software you built on top of it would run more reliably.
You said that this job transformed you from an APL geek to a computer scientist, right? I remember you said that. Can you explain why the transformation was important to you?
Yeah. It's important not to tie yourself to something that's so niche that you may wake up one day and find yourself without a job. Part of the reason I went to IBM was because I wanted to be exposed to a number of different areas within technology. So if one of the technologies were to go defunct or become an orphan, you were able to do something else to benefit the business some other way. I was also mentored by a couple of people within the company that were fantastic computer scientists. One of them is actually here. He may not know he was my mentor, but he was. And he helped really open things up for me because he could program what appeared to be almost any language, and I felt really jealous about that.
Like, I know what I have to do about that.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, after about 2 years, you became a project manager. What are the skills that you think you demonstrated to earn that promotion?
Influence people, both your peers as well as the staff below you. Because in a place like Morgan Stanley, it wasn't good enough if you were their boss. If you said, do it this way, they often would challenge you. Because a lot of times the people that worked for you were smarter. So your ability to get people to do things that they didn't necessarily know they could do was important, or didn't want to do, but felt ultimately it was the right thing to do. So you'd have to influence them. Just telling people what to do wasn't good enough. People just didn't take orders in that place the same way in most places. They had to believe it was the right thing to do.
How did you do that?
For one, I used trust and integrity. And often the case, I would do it myself as well. So I'd show them that I actually knew how to do some of this stuff as well. I was going to be there in hand-to-hand combat with them, roll up my sleeve, help them be successful.
And how did your day-to-day work life change when you got that promotion?
Well, it just kept getting tougher and tougher. It never got easier and easier there. People were expected you to do more and more and more. And the better you were, the more they wanted you to do, which obviously makes common sense. Whereas in some companies, it's the exact opposite. The further you move up, the less actually you do. But theoretically, it should be be what I described, because you can have greater impact on the business.
Yeah. You'd always dealt with the technology. How did you like dealing with the people side in a more formal way?
Much greater challenge. Generally, you tell a computer to do something, it does it. You tell a person to do it, maybe they do it. And again, it's all about it's all about influence, getting people to believe that what you're suggesting is in fact the right thing to do.
Well, within about another 2 years, you were promoted again to vice president. Tell us about that promotion.
Well, it's interesting because I was promoted based upon what I had done in the past, but what I was about to do was going to be very different. All of a sudden, we were going to abandon the set of technologies that made us very, very successful and go do something that was completely different. So I handed all of my staff to somebody else and decided to embark on something new, which was distributed computing and really deploying a technology called Unix at the time.
And how did that whole thing change your life, that decision to go after that?
The first 6 months, I was a total failure. I couldn't get it to work. I couldn't get the hardware to work well, the operating environment to work well. I couldn't convince the application programmers that it wasn't the wild, wild west, that in fact we did have to put some controls on the environment. So feeling like a failure for about 6 months was a pretty depressing situation to be in.
How did you like kind of going from having a staff to going back to being an individual contributor?
Second nature. Again, if I felt, in this case, I felt the impact of the business was going to be so significant, it was important for me to understand it first, then to be able to bring people into the equation, to influence them, to help me take it to the next level. So I had to learn it. And you can't learn it, right, by just supervising and just managing. You have to get your hands in it for a while. And that's really what I was trying to do.
When we were talking about this, one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting is that it's freeing, in a way, to be able to have I mean, it probably didn't feel very luxurious, but to have the luxury of really being able to envelop something without having the, for lack of a better term, baggage of having other people to depend on you and rely on you in a managerial way. Was it a hard sell to say, I'm going to take some time and just go off and do this, or was it the way that they saw it should be done?
I think the way it was we were standing in a line and someone said, who wants to do Unix? And everybody took a step back and I was standing there like an idiot by myself. So I was the stupidest one of the crowd. And I had some experience in doing that type of thing, but not taking that kind of risk. At a place like Morgan, you didn't have a lot of time. Even though it was new and it was pioneering and different and all that, they expected results. So when you start pushing several months of when is it going to be done, you start getting nervous, and that is what really fuels you in many cases.
And how did this project end up bringing you to Japan?
Well, we had a really smart trader who had some really interesting ideas about how to trade stocks. There was some arbitrage opportunities he thought existed in the market. We had a bunch of great programmers that had some ideas and really wanted to take a lot of risk. He assembled a couple of us. He was a business guy. All he wanted was technology that worked and worked fast and gave him a competitive advantage. We built an environment that we felt would actually work, tried it out in New York, worked fairly well, we thought, and in fact exported that to Japan. But he needed somebody, the head trader, while he went to Japan to trade, needed somebody to beat up every day if it didn't work, and that was going to be me.
Again, sounds like you stood still for 1 second too long. So when did you decide that it was time to move your family to Japan and get beat up on a daily basis?
Well, it wasn't something I really decided. It was like, you go to Japan, you have a month to move, and that was kind of how things happened. And being the risk taker, was something that you pretty much had to do. I saw it as a fantastic opportunity, really.
Through this project, you ended up becoming Morgan Stanley's head of IT in the Far East. What were some of the challenges that you found working with a culture that's so different? Yeah, very different. Culture is rooted in teamwork. And you don't single out specific individuals for their performance. You single out the team. That's fundamental in the culture. And so things work differently. Plus, it's a culture where there's not a lot of conflict during the day, during the meetings. So you don't call people out. You don't have arguments in public. You do all that at night, actually. In the dark? More often than not, you're doing it in a bar, actually, because that's what people are comfortable with. They're not comfortable engaging in conflict during the day. They want to do it later on at night in a much more relaxed setting. How safe did you find the Japan subway system? Fantastic. You could sleep in the subway system. You could put your wallet on the floor. How about a briefcase? Occasionally something would go wrong. Yeah, did anything go wrong with one of your briefcases? Do you really want me to tell that story? I do want you to tell that story. Okay. Well, I was in Tokyo Station, and I was about to pick up a train to go actually to the airport. And as I was trying to figure out how to pay for my ticket, someone stole it and ran out the door and ran down the street. And I saw the doors close. They were electronic. And I walked out the door, and I saw them walking down the street with my briefcase. So imagine for a moment in Tokyo, an American running down the street, grabbing a Japanese person, saying, that's my briefcase. They run, I chase them, tackle them on the sidewalk, and bring my briefcase back, put them in a headlock, and bring them back to Tokyo Station. Imagine how that must have looked, that scene. Yeah. Was this early in your time in Japan, or fairly? It was early on, and I didn't get arrested. Did the other person get arrested? Believe it or not, actually they told the truth, I told the truth, and it took a little bit of time, but all of a sudden they just kind of disappeared at some point during the conversation. Wow. What's your proudest accomplishment from your time spent in Japan? I guess getting people to accept a foreigner as, someone that could actually lead them, someone that they could really trust. Building trust in that culture was very, very difficult. You had to do what you said you were going to do. You have to behave in a very, very different way. And again, teamwork really mattered. So adapting to that culture and seeing the staff really believe that you had adapted to that culture was key, because it was a very, very different experience for me. Yeah. And they have to want you to succeed. That's right. Because they can easily sabotage. Easily. The vendors can sabotage you because it was very oligopolistic there. You didn't have a lot of choice, and they could easily just decide they're not ready to do that, or they don't understand you. That was kind of one way of doing it. So building that trust was critical. You came back to the U.S. to take over the IT department. How large was the organization and what were you chartered to do at this time?
Well, it was an interesting experience because the guy who was running trading out there in Japan that I had partnered with to build this one system became the CIO in a bit of a hostile takeover, quite frankly, the way it worked. So all of a sudden, one day, IT was run by a sort of typical IT department, relatively bureaucratic, although Morgan was pretty good at what it did. And then the next day it was run by a trader. So imagine a trader managing 50 people. The next day he's managing 1,500. And he put people in charge of the group that were kind of like mavericks, that weren't what I'd call professional managers, yours truly being one of them.
The maverick or the professional
the
manager?
Maverick,
Yeah.
the Maverick, and there were several of us, and you know, we were sitting around thinking, what do we do now? Because we didn't regard ourselves as senior managers. We definitely regarded ourselves as doers and people who could impact the business. But we were managing a group of 1,500 people. The guy who was running the department really trusted us a lot. That was important, but all of a sudden wanted us to become professional managers in a day. That was basically his way of training us. He would
Sounds
say,
like the Morgan way.
that's the way. Do it
Yeah.
and do it fast. You know, that was his way of getting us to do things. So we were pretty scared, I'd say.
And so you worked on the infrastructure project. Tell us
Right.
about that.
Well, Morgan was investing a significant amount of money in rebuilding its infrastructure. We were buying buildings. We were growing the business significantly. This was the end of '93, and '93 had been a very, very good year in the markets. Unfortunately, '94
Not so
wasn't
much,
such a good
yeah.
year. So when you make commitments to the level we were making, commitments in technology and buying buildings and spending money on technology, these are assets that depreciate over time. You can't undo it very, very quickly. So we were investing when others were not investing, so we were kind of an outlier at the time. So it was pretty intimidating to be in the market that way at that time.
How important is data punctuality and data accuracy to this business?
In financial services, you might as well not have the data if the data versus the data being wrong, or in many cases being latent.
And define late.
Late could be milliseconds
Yep.
in our business, based upon the trading that we did.
Yeah, no pressure there.
No, not at all.
As one moves up the ranks within a technical discipline, you always end up having to leave some of your technical strength behind. How do you manage that when you've been a hands-on person for so long, and at a certain point you've just got to let go of understanding the technology at the I could do it level?
Yeah.
How did you do that, or have you done that?
There are two things, really. You can't look at it as letting go. You have to look at it as learning something new. And you have to set an objective that says, I want to do this, and this is more valuable based upon my position, and I should be delegating this to somebody else so I can spend more time on the value add. That's key. The other thing is your people want to do what you're doing. They want to learn what you've learned. And if you don't let them do that, you take something away from them.
So how did you did it by just
It's instinct.
convincing yourself that you weren't letting go, but you were gaining something?
Absolutely, it's instinct. You're constantly in learning mode, and if you're a technologist and you don't believe you're in learning mode, you don't belong in technology. You really have to believe that, and you're just learning different things, new things, ways of motivating people, ways of combining technology with the business to help it make money. That's how you add value, not by doing the same thing over and over again.
So 1993 was a good year, and 1994 was a not so good year.
That's right.
This led to your next big challenge. Tell us about that challenge.
It was a short-term and a long-term challenge. The short-term was I was asked to basically cut costs as much as I possibly could out of the fixed cost base. And the president of the company asked the CIO, who's your best cost cutter? And he said it was me. And I was asked to run a program for 6 months to cut as much cost base out of the cost base as I possibly can. And I was sitting there with the president, and I said, well, I need an exit strategy because I'm going to make a lot of enemies in this process. And he said, you can have any job you want in IT. And there was a job that was in Europe that I wanted, but I had to hit my targets. Otherwise, I don't think I'd have a job at all.
How long did it take you to hit your targets?
In 4 months, we hit the target. We had to exceed 20 million. We hit $24 million. And at the 4-month mark, I gave a presentation to the president, and he said, you're done.
You're on a plane.
You're on a plane, you can go. But then he played an interesting trick on me, actually. Which, do you want me to tell that story?
Sure.
Interesting story. We were all set to give a series of presentations to the president and the operating committee the following day. At night, there was going to be a dinner. And at the dinner, we were supposed to do a rehearsal. So it was just the heads of the IT group, about 40 of us, talking to each other. And just prior to that meeting, the president calls my boss and says, I need to talk to Chris. Bring him into my office right away. So I go in, my boss is sitting there, my boss's boss is sitting there, and he said, Chris, good news is you did a fantastic job with cost cutting. The bad news is we want you to stay and we want you to do some other work as well. I said, well, I'm supposed to be going to London. My wife is there, my family is there. You know, we've already moved, basically. I got to get there, and I got to get there fast. Oh, no, we're going to put them all on a plane, and we're going to move everybody back here. I don't think you've met my wife. And I told him, she's not going to move back. He said, we'll give her an offer she can't refuse. So this is a guy you really didn't mess around with. I was pretty unhappy, to say the least. So I'm sitting there, and I thought, this is not going well. And there were people making bets, because I'll explain the rest of the story in a minute, making bets that I was going to explode in the meeting, actually. But you don't do that with the president of the company and expect to be employed.
No, you explode later.
That's right, you explode later. So I walked out of his office, and I walked into the dinner, and I sat down, and the person who's actually the CIO at Morgan Stanley now looked at me and he said, you're pretty mad. Is there a problem? I said, yeah, I'm actually going to be staying. My family has to be moved back now from London. He said, have you told your wife this? And I said, no, not yet. Oh, she'll be really happy with that. So the CIO gets up, starts the dinner. We're supposed to be giving rehearsal presentations. I was supposed to be giving one, and his name was Kevin. And Kevin said, well, the good news about Chris is he's here. The bad news is he's going to be staying here. He's not going to London. People start laughing. They think it's pretty funny. I don't think it's very funny at all. In fact, I'm pretty angry at this point. But he wouldn't let me call my wife, which I thought was really strange. Why wouldn't he let me do that? So 5 minutes later, the president walks in the back of the room. He's laughing. This was one big practical joke that they all decided to play because they knew I had a bad temper.
Yeah.
But I didn't
And it was just a
explode.
matter of how long you could sort of hold it in there.
That's right. That's right.
Were you very proud of yourself for
Very much.
retaining that?
Yeah.
So apparently your family was ready to move and was excited about the move to London. How does it differ to manage IT in London and IT in the Far East and IT in the U.S.?
Yeah, very different. You have enough, in an operation that's run out of New York that tends to be centralized, and when you're in Asia, you're far away. There's advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage is when you call people up, they basically try to ignore you. The advantage is you're so far away, they're just not in tune with what you're doing, so you can do some interesting things. But you don't have a lot of the skill base and the expertise when you're that far away. When you're an American company that has a big business in the U.S. and a pretty big business in London, your business in Tokyo tends to be relatively small based upon what we were doing. Whereas in London, you're kind of in between. You're far enough away where you can do some interesting stuff, away from the corporate immune system. You got a pretty good skill base, right? Because you're in Europe and you've got a variety of markets you can tap from. Not too big to be too bureaucratic. So it's kind of the best of all worlds. However, you have to be trusted, because if you're out there and your partners back in New York don't trust you, you're not going to be able to get a lot done.
And how did you make that work?
Well, what was interesting is when they decided to ask, people in London were actually asked, who would they like to run London? Isn't that kind of amazing? Since when do people actually ask? They actually wanted somebody who was from the management team in the U.S. I thought they'd want a local Brit. And they actually, believe it or not, had asked for me because they felt that I was influential within the management team in New York, and that I was enough of a leader to help them kind of come into their own and enable them to do some things over time once we were trusted. When I went there, I found that it was sort of like the downtrodden. This was a group of people that had been ignored. They had been basically oppressed for the most part, and they needed to be motivated. They needed to be told that they could do it, and they need to be trusted by the people back in New York.
So you really did some great things for them.
Well, I mean, they did it themselves. It was just me a matter of kind of freeing them from the shackles.
To do that. And then after about 14 months, your boss didn't play a practical joke on you and asked you to come back. How did that conversation go?
Not well. You're coming home is kind of what he said. And I really wasn't ready. In fact, the chairman of Morgan Stanley Europe didn't want me to go at the time. We were getting along really well, doing some good things. It appeared like it was going to be the best thing for the business at the time. But I really wasn't ready. There were more things that I needed to accomplish. I was asked to run a project that, in the scheme of things, couldn't be done with the people who they were going to put on the project. The people I wanted were the 3 or 4 best people in the whole department, and this was a multi-$100-million project, so you can't do it unless you have the best. And they wouldn't give me the best, so I declined and said, I'm not going to do that.
And you did more than decline.
I more than declined. At the time, my boss's boss had left. I went to another firm called Deutsche Bank and recruited me to Deutsche Bank.
What was appealing about that role?
It was impossible. It was a 10,000-person startup company, build a premier global investment bank through some acquisitions, some re-engineering, technology, business re-engineering as well, and do it as fast as you can.
And how did you merge a lot of those cultures and technologies?
Oh, it was very, very difficult. There were businesses that were kind of infighting with one another, technologists that were infighting with one another. The only way you see through all this is you have to establish a set of common objectives that are tied to the business. However, if the business doesn't know what it really, really wants, then you're in trouble. You can't affect it with technology unless the business has a pretty strong view. So that made it actually pretty difficult.
And you'd spent a lot of years with Morgan Stanley, but it turned out you only spent 2 years here. When you were recruited by Merrill Lynch, were you ready?
Yeah, I was ready. Merrill had a fantastic brand. They had a cash cow on the retail side of the business that should be able to generate enough profits to be able to grow the other businesses. One of the key ones was a fee-based business called asset management, and the other was a capital markets business. And I remember there was a time, probably back, I would say the late 80s, I was fortunate enough to sit next to the chairman of Morgan Stanley at the time at a dinner, and I asked him one question: what firms are you worried about? And he said, I'm worried about Merrill Lynch, and I'm worried about JP Morgan. And what are you worried about Merrill Lynch? He said they have this cash cow, this engine on the retail side that just fuels the rest of their businesses, covers all their fixed costs. And I never forgot that. Yeah, if the chairman was going to say that, I thought they must be an important company to wonder. Great brand, and they were well positioned.
So when you moved back to New York at this point to do this job, how did it feel to be back?
Good, bad. On the plus side, you know, I understood the culture a lot better than the culture overseas. There were things that, you know, I could get done a little bit faster than what would have happened in Tokyo or London. On the other hand, people just weren't as polite. And I got used to people being polite. I had gotten spoiled. So it was back to the semi-caustic culture that I had seen in New York prior to going to Japan.
Does it come back fast?
It does. Very fast.
Just like the accent. You just spend a week there and it comes back fast.
That's right.
Well, you were in your office that was frighteningly close to the Twin Towers when the first plane hit on 9/11. What was your initial reaction?
Oh boy, you know, lives are at stake. And I remember we had these devices by RIM called the Blackberries. And immediately people were messaging each other to see if each other were okay, because you didn't know who was where, you didn't know who escaped from what, who was in the buildings, who was outside the buildings. People were running all over the place, and for a period of time the service worked. And I just remember sending these messages, "Are you okay?" You know, to my staff. And I kept getting responses back that, "Yes, I'm okay." There was one person I called who I knew was giving a presentation on I think it was the top floor. Windows of the World. There was a conference up there, a Waters conference up there. And the gentleman's name was Michael Packer. And he was giving a presentation. In fact, I was supposed to be there with him, but I declined to go. And unfortunately, he didn't make it. So I remember leaving him a voice message.
And professionally, what did you do?
Well, we had a bit of a task at hand. We had to go into disaster recovery mode, which meant we were in the World Financial Center at the time, very close to World Trade. We basically got on the ferry, went across the river over to Jersey City where we had a backup data center, and we basically had to restore the entire capital markets business over there.
And how did you go about doing that?
Actually, it was pretty straightforward. Everybody knew what the objective was: get it done and get it done as fast as possible. There was no bureaucracy to speak of. It was me working really hand in hand with the business, prioritizing which things we're going to do first. We focused on risk management first, and then one by one just started bringing up those businesses. The staff was fantastic. The suppliers that we had were fantastic. People worked 24/7 to get it done.
One of the things that seems to happen with a lot of backup plans is that people do a good job testing backup, but they don't do a very good job testing recovery, because you really need to have duplicate systems in order to fully test recovery. In retrospect, had you guys done a good job preparing for something like this?
No, I mean, but I don't think anybody could have prepared for what we had, what happened.
I mean, from any kind of disaster,
yeah, I mean,
not even...
First and foremost, the emotional dimension of that was completely crazy. I mean, there were people who didn't want to go to work and shouldn't have gone to work. People whose families were worried about them. It was the trickiest thing we had was, you know, who do you need to keep, and who should you just send home, because they're not prepared for something like that.
Yeah.
So the lives that were at stake were really, really high, and that's what we were worried about first in the beginning. And then it was, you know, how do we get this operation to work? How do we get it to run? What's most important?
Well, after about 3 years with Merrill Lynch, you Did something you probably never thought you would do, and you took some time off.
Yeah.
What led to that decision?
Certainly part of it was the experience during 9/11. You only live once kind of thing. I'd worked very, very hard for a long time. Took a lot, there were a lot of sacrifices, including sacrificing time with my family. It was time to try to give a little bit of that back and figure out, what do I really want to do next? Do I want to stay in financial services? Do I want to stay in technology? Maybe go into semi-retirement, become a consultant, maybe do something entirely different.
Yeah. Well, during this time, you actually returned to your roots in volunteering. Your father would have been proud. Tell us about some of your volunteering efforts.
There were a lot of people that needed help in businesses, and I was happy to help them on advisory boards, or just in startup mode. Helping them, bring technologists to them to help them test out some of their business ideas. In fact, help people find other people that they were recruiting. I had a lot of relationships with recruiters that were looking for good people, and I would try to help them find the good people that were also looking for something interesting to do.
Did you seriously consider going to medical school and becoming a doctor?
I did. I was pretty close. Someone brought me a book on nanomedicine. They're actually in the crowd. And unfortunately, my wife didn't want to see me studying for 100 hours a week.
Well, how did your next role come about?
Well, people kept telling me, you ought to run a business. In fact, you ought to start a business. And there were a number of us got together and really looked into that hard. And I was a little bit worried. I didn't have, quite frankly, enough self-confidence to put that entire burden on myself and take these people, in effect, to the promised land of running your own business. So after several sessions of meeting with people looking at that, I thought, I really have to experience this myself first before I feel like I can take them into something like that and be responsible for their lives and livelihood. So I wanted to learn how to run a business first, and I joined a company that's an outsource firm, an Indian outsource firm called Wipro.
And what were you doing with them?
I ran their securities practice. And the whole concept was to build verticals within a business that had been very horizontal. Wipro does a very, very good job of taking on application development and maintenance across all industries. A fairly generic service. Tends to be commoditized, primarily done in India. But we had a different idea. We would build verticals and try to move up the value chain and charge more money for that expertise.
Well, you uncovered fairly quickly that while you and the Wipro founders shared common objectives, you actually had quite different strategies. What were those differences, and what did that lead to?
There was a window of opportunity. The economy the stars were aligning, although not in the way you'd hope them to align, but we had a bad economy, we had bad financial markets, right? And outsourcing was in huge demand. And I saw this significant window where financial services firms would actually be willing to outsource something that they felt in many cases was their core competency, that they would never have done had they not been in a position where they had to save a tremendous amount of money. So that window, plus the contacts I had in the industry, that people would really trust me. If I said we could do it, we really could do it. It presented a tremendous opportunity. Unfortunately, to get there, you really had to do it by acquisition. You couldn't hire the people that were skilled fast enough to build that business. So I wanted the company to acquire more than they were probably willing to invest at that point in time.
When AT&T Wireless contacted you about the CIO spot, what was the most appealing and the least appealing things about the offer?
The most appealing was, I worked for a gentleman named Michael Keith, and he is at least as intense as I am. And it's been a long time since I worked for somebody like that who would push me to the limit. And he had the impossible task, what I thought. Fiercely competitive industry, a department that was really disconnected from the business, tremendous number of people investing a tremendous amount of money in an environment that it wasn't clear to me how long this would last. Will this company be able to compete successfully? And what I was curious about was how important was really technology, not just the cell technology, but the information systems that ran that business. Was this a cell company? Was this a wireless company? Or was this an information company? What was this? So that's what made me curious. And then I met the management team that ran the company, and then I was sold. On the least appealing side, I didn't know much about Seattle, so it wasn't like I didn't like it, I just didn't know. So it was a big risk on my part, a big personal risk.
Unlike moving to Japan and London.
Right, which was much easier to think about.
Okay. And now that you've decided to come all the way across the country, what is your core mission in undertaking the position?
Build the best technology department in the industry.
How did you go about learning the wireless business? When you went into financial services, you were kind of indoctrinated by that midnight
Yeah.
MBA.
That's right. Yeah, we don't really have that. I didn't read any books and magazines, although I was given a lot. There were people dropping a lot of hints that I should. I just ask a lot of questions. I'm curious. If I don't know something, I keep asking questions. I'm the dumbest guy around when it comes to wireless, but I've thought if I just keep asking questions, I'll learn a lot from a lot of different people.
And what are some of the high-level steps that you're taking to achieve your objectives?
Well, we're re-engineering the entire department, top down. I have brought in about 10 people from the outside, promoted from within about 6 people, tripled the size of the management team to really go after a lot of different things simultaneously. We're structuring ourselves to look and operate like an IT services company, to be much more commercially focused, to really align ourselves with the business and look like a consulting company in essence, which is very different. We're optimizing our application portfolio, building a robust disaster recovery plan, and looking at data as a strategic asset to the business as opposed to something you bill a customer. We want to use that to actually make more money.
Well, I know that you've only been there about 6 months, but so far, what has been easy that you thought would be hard, and what has been hard that you thought would be easy?
Easy, you ask people to do things, and they actually do it.
What a concept.
They don't give you a hard time. They don't second guess you every step of the way. It's really refreshing. What's been difficult is the skill base of the people isn't as high as I thought it was going to be. So sometimes you tell someone to do something, it isn't that they don't do it because they don't want to, they don't know how. So you have to teach a little bit more than what I thought.
And how are you go about managing that?
You hire really, really good people and establish a set of objectives. And ultimately, you have to provide training programs to do that. One of the things we do every day I run a call, my staff loves it, 7 o'clock in the morning, and we talk about problems.
Now, I've got to mention to everybody, 7 o'clock is already
late.
3 hours
That's late.
after you've
That's
woken
late,
up
yeah.
from what you've told me.
We could do it at 4 when I wake up, but I guess that's a little bit early. So at 7 we do the problem call, and at 7:30 we actually have a management meeting every single day at 7:30 in the morning for about a half an hour, where we go through, and each person talks for about 2 minutes, some talk a little bit longer, about what's going on for the last 24 hours. Then at 6 o'clock we actually review changes every single
6
day.
o'clock at night?
PM.
PM.
Yeah, so we do that. So between those meetings, you learn a lot.
I mean, I tease you, but as I'm thinking back, during one of my first jobs at Microsoft, we also had 7:30 coffee meetings every morning, so I guess I shouldn't,
There you go.
I shouldn't tease that much. What are some of the biggest challenges that you see facing IT organizations in general in the next couple of years?
Yeah. Predicting what the business wants to do before the business actually formally articulates it. Because by the time a business says, I want to go do this, they want to do it tomorrow. And they want to do it tomorrow because they want to be competitive. They want to win. So how do you anticipate that? Because building IT systems or integrating IT systems, maintaining IT systems, this isn't something you can do and turn on a dime all that easily. So that's one dimension to it. The other is you're always inheriting a pile of software, a pile of hardware, an infrastructure that's fairly complex. Techniques for optimizing that rapidly are the key, not new development. A lot of CIOs, they focus on new development environments or new tools. You can forget about that. Like, how do you optimize your existing infrastructure to be able to do things faster? That's kind of the key.
Yeah, so if those are some of the challenges, what do you think are some of the brightest opportunities?
In the industry or just in general?
Within the IT industry.
Within IT. Taking an industry, for example, like ours, and making it real time. Traditionally, wireless has been a business where a customer uses a telephone and you bill them at the end of the month. So turning companies that are really fundamentally information companies truly into information-based companies from a strategic standpoint. So if you look at AT&T Wireless, right, we don't make money selling handsets, right? We're going to make money based upon the information, based upon what people are actually doing with that, and be able to sell them additional services based upon what they're doing. So it's information management. That's what the biggest opportunity is, mining that information.
You talked a little bit about offshore outsourcing and that you were a part of that company. When should it be employed, and how do you do it well, and what are some of the things you need to watch out for?
You have to take what you do and break it up into a couple of different chunks, one of which is how commoditized is it? Can it be done by somebody else better, possibly faster and cheaper? And if so, just do it. Most of us are shareholders in the companies we work for these days. Why wouldn't you do it that way? right? So if you can break it up into, this is a relatively straightforward technology. We do it over and over again. It certainly can be commoditized. There's companies that have credentials that prove they can do it not only cheaper, but they can do it even faster and better. Just move it. Every industry experiences that. That's a global competitor these days. So the non-core or the commoditized work, just move it offshore. Anything that requires the management of high-quality data and data that you're using to actually make more money in the business, that you should keep in-house.
And what are some of the things you have to watch out for and do carefully, not just in terms of choosing which project, but once you've decided to go the outsourcing route, how do you do it well?
Culture's key. We talked about this a little bit about the Japanese culture, and in particularly with India, when you say do it this way, they actually do it that way. But that isn't always what you mean, right? And you find that a lot in companies that move very, very fast. You want to partner with a company that actually thinks about your business a little bit differently than maybe you're thinking about it, and can anticipate things and ask you questions. Is this what you really mean? If we do it this way, it'll cost you 3 times than if we do it this way. Is it okay to do it this way? That's the kind of company you want to partner with. So you actually you have to train them on your culture, and they have to train you on their culture, so you're able to bridge the gaps that actually exist.
Because you want to be able to take the most benefit of what they can do if you're going to be doing it all in the first place. What are some of the new technologies on the horizon that you're really excited about?
Well, let me talk about our industry. What you want to be able to do is, again, operate our business in real time as opposed to operate the business once a month, right? So for our business, it's all about data, moving away from voice. And it's about doing transactions, for example, from a handset. Being able to walk around with your telephone, walk into your house, all of a sudden now you've got a wireless phone that really operates like a wireline phone in the house. And when you leave the house, it's your wireless phone. When you walk up to areas in neighborhoods, you're close to restaurants, maybe menus can show up on that telephone. You can do transactions as you get close to different restaurants. You can see menus. You can operate such as you're integrating with the environment around you, using the telephone as just like an assistant, instead of having a regular assistant.
How long before we get there?
Well, there's bits and pieces of it coming about today over the next couple of years. It requires massive investment in data networks to really move that amount of data. Technologies like UMTS will help do that, one of the technologies that we're implementing today.
How would you describe your management style?
I have many styles, actually.
Okay.
There's the calm one you're witnessing right now.
Okay.
And
how common is that?
One. It's very calm. When it's getting better, when people are learning, people are improving incrementally, I'm pretty calm. I get pretty frustrated when they're not. So you have to be the teacher, you have to be the mother, the father, the disciplinarian, and the coach, and the mentor, all wrapped in one. And it's very situational. And you really have to be on your toes and deal with it. And I deal different with people one-on-one than I deal with them in a group, than I deal in front of 600 people.
How has your style changed over the years?
I'd like to think I listen better. But
do you?
I think so, because the older I get, the less I feel like I know. And actually, the interesting thing about Microsoft, when I walked into Redmond about 1988, the first thing I saw was listening is at the heart of innovation. And if you think about it, you can't learn anything if you're talking all the time. You can only learn if you're listening. And that's what I try to do. Sometimes I'm a little impatient, so I'm not that good at it, but that's what I strive for.
You've had a lot of experience in your career having to kind of morph into different cultures. What are some of the characteristics from your East Coast personality that you're bringing with you effectively, and what are some of the things that you found you really have to leave behind in order to be able to get your job done in this more gentle setting?
I think there's a certain sense of urgency that you bring when you worked in the environment I worked in. That's really important. And one of the things I learned probably after about 4 or 5 years, it was really the move into Morgan Stanley was, why wait? Get it done as fast as you possibly can, provided that you can do it right, that you have the people around you and the skills to do it right. Why wait for tomorrow? Why wait 10 minutes? Just get it done now. Don't procrastinate. So having that sense of urgency in the environment you're in is such that it really begs that. It really wants you to do things fast, because there's a lot at stake in an environment like that. But you also have to do it right, because if you do something that breaks, it's terrible because of the impact that you're having. Now, in that particular case, it's about money. which can have an emotional effect on people. So you really want to get it right. So it's that sense of urgency. As far as what I want to leave behind is the caustic nature of that specific environment, but I think that general scene. You don't have to be tough and nasty to get things done. You really don't, to really get your point across.
How you doing?
I don't know. Maybe ask them.
Do you find that you're a better manager or leader?
Oh, probably leader.
Why?
I'm not as administrative as I think I'd like to be sometimes in terms of dotting every I and crossing every T. My mantra is to make people better, and I think that's what managers are supposed to do. In fact, I think you're supposed to make people reach their absolute best.
What areas of running an IT organization do you find the most challenging?
Getting the business to recognize that IT is their investment, and it's not the IT guy's responsibility only. That's probably the first difficult thing that most companies face when they looked at data processing and saw it as this necessary evil or this cost-saving thing, getting them to think about it as an enabler, and that they actually have to co-manage that investment. That's the toughest thing to do.
How do you do it?
Teach. Teach people about the importance of what you do. Teach people about the value add. And teach people how expensive it really is to do. So I provide transparency in what I do and what it costs. Just lay it all on the table and help and give people choices.
Tactically, how do you do it?
Tactically, it's called portfolio management. No different than managing a portfolio of stocks. So you have a portfolio of projects, you have business owners of those projects, and you got to convince the business owner to be a co-investor in that project and get them engaged. Make them responsible for providing their requirements and really understanding the life cycle of the project.
Have you found it hard or easy to get to know the business managers? Have they been really open or?
Here?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. We have a management committee that lives and breathes with each other. We probably spend, I would say 5 to 10 hours a week, depending upon the week. We have tactical discussions. We have strategic discussions. We are in each other's face a lot.
Is that a good thing?
It's good if you like each other.
If you don't like each other,
it's not very good.
What are some of the characteristics that you look for in a freshly minted undergrad or freshly minted MBA?
I'm looking for integrity, number one. Integrity is built on do you do what you say you're going to do? So if you make a commitment to me, it doesn't matter how much experience you have. If you say you're going to do something, that really matters to me. So I'll look for that. That's how you build trust. And once you've built trust, then you get a lot more opportunities. So it's fundamental. If you say you're going to go to work on time, go to work on time. And it may seem awfully simple, but you'd be surprised how many people don't go to work on time. And it really fundamentally starts there. And again, when you make commitments, if you realize those commitments, what will happen is your manager will give you more and more and more things to do, and therefore you can excel more and more and more.
So in addition to integrity, when you're doing an interview, what are some of the other things you're looking for?
What I call situational brain power, which is I throw different situations in front of people and see how they respond. For example, what I'll do in a technical interview, I'm a little bit technical still these days, I'll say to them, some of the people that I'm interviewing, a trader just called you, right, and said, this system really is terrible, it stinks, slams down the phone. What do you do? Like, what are the questions you ask? How do you help that person? What do you do? And you get all kinds of responses in a question like that.
Where do you see yourself 5 years from now?
Maybe golfing? I don't know. I live across the street from a golf course, and I live on the lake, on Lake Washington. Hopefully at AT&T Wireless, maybe running a business.
We'll be back to take questions from the audience right after this.
The University of Washington Business School, located in Seattle, Washington, ranks among the top business schools in the United States. Information Technology Leaders is one of the many ways the UW Business School forges partnerships and reaches out beyond the university. For more information about the University of Washington Business School or Information Technology Leaders, visit informationtechnologyleaders.com.
What is the best way to learn another country's culture, especially in a work setting?
Yeah. I mean, you have to do a little bit of research. Actually, before I went to Japan, I read a book, and that helped a bit. Some of these books are pretty humorous. And then what I would do is go out and try to make friends that are locals outside of work, actually, as well, because you'll learn a lot more about the culture, because people are a lot more apt to tell you what's going on in the environment than they will in the work environment, because the work environment is kind of protected. Plus, in a lot of work environments, for example, if you're working for an American company in another country, it won't quite be the same as if you're working with a local company, for example, like in Japan. Interestingly enough, when I went to London, I thought, well, they speak English here. How different could it be? Boy, was I wrong. So, you know, I was backpedaling quite a bit in the beginning until I really learned what I got myself into. Plus, in that environment, you're actually dealing with a lot of different cultures. Because if you're in a city, you have to believe that it's not just the British culture you're having to deal with, right? Because, you know, you're in Europe, you're dealing with a lot of different cultures. So make friends with people outside of work, and you'll actually learn a lot more about the culture faster.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'd like to close with a quote from someone that Chris has worked with for several years. I've known Chris for about 7 years, and I continue to be impressed by his sense of purpose, sense of urgency, and sense of focus. He is incredibly driven and will do the right thing for an organization regardless of personal consequences. As a manager, he delegates well, articulates requirements clearly, and always provides the support necessary to empower his direct reports. It's very important to him that he enables the people to think for themselves rather than always needing to check in for confirmation. Chris has been somebody that I continue to look up to. When I have a doubt, I think, what would Chris do? And I follow that path. It always serves me well.